Okay, we are live, so welcome back, my friends, to the public hearing that never ends. Okay, it is March 3rd. I am the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, Kumar Barve. I'm joined by the vice chair, I think. No, Dana, yeah, there he is, Dana Stein. And we have 4 bills before us, and they're going to go in this order. House Bill 833 is going to be first, and then the rest of the bills will go in numerical order. House Bill 635, which is the Prince George's delegation, presented by Delegate Ivey, I understand. House Bill 693, the Cecil delegation, and then House Bill 843, Delegate Howard. So, 833, Delegate Buckle, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Jason Buckle presenting House Bill 833.
All right, I got to get into ENT, but yeah, we'll help.
Somebody needs to mute themselves.
Thank you. House Bill 833 is a bill which would extend and expand the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund. I know that your committee is familiar with the purposes and the reasons for the fund. The state has, I believe, 16 state-owned lakes. Really from every corner of the state, from the largest, I believe, being Deep Creek Lake in Western Maryland, all throughout pretty much every region from Central Maryland, Southern Maryland, the Eastern Shore, our urban and rural and suburban communities all have some of these lakes. Currently, the fund has $1 million that is appropriated to it every year, and that $1 million appropriation sunsets in fiscal year 2022. What this bill would do is take away that sunset. It would extend the length of the funding program for the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund, and it would also increase the mandated appropriation from $1 million to $3 million. The rationale behind that is that, quite frankly, given the nature of the work that needs to be done to restore and maintain these lakes in the proper environmental fashion and ecological fashion so that they can be used by our citizens, quite frankly, costs more than $1 million a year. It had been deferred maintenance, so to speak, for many, many years, and putting a little bit more money into the program and extending the life of the program would have a tremendous beneficial effect for the environment and for the ability of the public to utilize and enjoy these treasures that we have in our state, these 16 state-owned lakes. It is sometimes rare to have a Republican supporting a mandated appropriation. I'm sure you guys all look at that, but we are. We believe in this program very, very much, and we believe that this funding is vital and necessary, and it needs to be done through legislation so that the program can operate correctly and you can plan things out for the proper length of time so it doesn't fluctuate from year to year. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions that the committee may have, Mr. Chair.
Well, actually, let's first go to Nicole Christian Nicole Christian with the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce, and then we'll entertain questions.
Sounds good. Nicole,
welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. As Chair Barbe said, I'm Nicole Christian, President and CEO of the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here on behalf of our 600 members in support of House Bill 833. Providing an annual allocation of $3 million to the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund will allow DNR and MDE the necessary funding to sufficiently address harmful and destructive issues impacting the 16 state-owned lakes in Maryland. Deep Creek Lake in Garrett County, the largest freshwater lake and inland body of water in Maryland, is an economic engine, helping to generate an economic impact of nearly $361 million annually. The property tax revenue derived from Deep Creek Lake watershed accounts for nearly 60% of county revenue. Deep Creek Lake is now 96 years old, and as happens with any man-made lake, it is experiencing issues with aquatic invasive species, sediment accumulation, shoreline erosion, and threats to water quality and conditions. The state, as the owner of Deep Creek Lake and the 15 other lakes, must allocate sufficient funding for protection programs, restoration, and remediation projects to sustain these important natural resources for future generations. The current $1 million annual allocation is grossly inadequate for the state to preserve and maintain all 16 lakes, and it expires next fiscal year. As an example, it costs DNR $215,000 annually for treatment of hydrilla just in Deep Creek Lake. Hydrilla is an aquatic invasive species that is highly threatening to a lake, and extensive treatment is needed to prevent it from taking over and rendering the lake useless. Additionally, some of the coves in Deep Creek Lake are silting in and reducing the recreational use and value of the properties in these coves. It is estimated that the dredging of just one cove, Arrowhead Cove, will cost approximately $2 million. These coves need to be dredged in the same way that the beaches on the Eastern Shore need to be replenished, which funding is provided for by the state. The $3 million proposed in 833 is necessary for the state to uphold its obligations to the 16 state-owned lakes, and we respectfully request that 833 is given a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. We have three friends from the Appropriations Committee joining us today, and the first question will go to one of those friends, Delegate Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not look at the fiscal note. I apologize for that. But has there been an inventory of all the deferred maintenance for the 16 lakes in the state?
I'm not aware if DNR has done that in a sense, Delegate Krim, that it's readily accessible. I know that each individual lake, as you just heard Ms. Christian talk about, that there is some analysis of what needs to be done, what should be done with several of the issues at Deep Creek Lake. But I frankly am not aware if they just have a one document or somewhere where you can go and look, and that has been performed for all 16 lakes that would all be eligible for funding from this particular funding source.
Might I answer that question as well, Delegate Buckle?
Sure.
I do know that we've been working with DNR and MDE on different projects with only having $1 million and trying to spread that across all 16 lakes with the different issues. I can tell you in Allegheny County, Lake Habib has some significant issues with an aquatic invasive species, hydrilla specifically. And so what we've been working with DNR on is really trying to come up with a prioritization list, but the $1 million was making it difficult to do many projects in 1 year. And I believe Delegate Beitzel is with us today from the Appropriations Committee, and I think he even knows more about that as he's part of the board that oversees the management of Deep Creek Lake.
Really? I've never heard him say anything about Deep Creek the whole time I've known him. Okay, Delegate Krim, are you good? Or do you have some more questions?
No, I just wanted to know, and has there ever been a discussion about maybe having a surcharge of the lake properties to maybe help with paying for that maintenance on Deep Creek Lake?
Honestly, I mean, I know it's not his bill. Delegate Beitzel probably would have a better idea and understanding of that. To my knowledge, there are a variety of things that the Deep Creek Lake, if you're within the watershed, you get a variety of different taxes and surcharges. I'm not sure if any of them are specifically applied to this type of situation, although there's a lot of money that comes out of Deep Creek Lake. And this is not, I don't want to create the impression for anyone that this is the only funding that's going to be used just to try to help Deep Creek or any lake. There's a wide variety of other local funding sources and programs to try to do this. But this particular fund geared toward these state lakes is crucial if we really want to keep up with maintaining the lakes in a usable fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Delegate Jay Jacobs and then Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Buckle, as though this bill is in pretty much the same posture as the one that Delegate Beitzel came in earlier with the extends the sunset. Is that true?
Yes, I think that's a fair way to look at it. Yes.
So this legislation is an increase in the revenue side of it from 1 to 3 million.
No, I mean, no, it wouldn't increase the revenue side. What it does is it increases the mandated appropriation from 1 to 3 million and extends the program. The way that the existing program is that the $1 million guaranteed yearly appropriation terminates. What we'd like to do is obviously keep the mandated appropriation going. Just as importantly, recognize that, as Ms. Christian said, and I'm sure as Delegate Beitzel knows well, the $1 million spread over 16 lakes, frankly, isn't really making enough of a dent. If we want to make a dent in these issues, we probably need to increase it. And 3 million is the number that Senator Edwards, who has the bill on the Senate side, and others that were involved, Delegate Beitzel for years, thought would make sense. Certainly, there's open to compromise, between those two numbers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I believe that it's definitely needs some additional funding. And it's this year, especially, I think from COVID, we've definitely seen an increase in visitors to the lakes and playgrounds that are connected to the lakes. When you agree with that?
Yes, I can tell you that the two most prominent lakes in my part of the world, which would be Deep Creek Lake and also Lake Habib, which is where the Rocky Gap Resort and the Rocky Gap State Park revolves around Lake Habib. I know for a fact that they've gotten tremendous amount of usage this year. People couldn't do certain other activities, and fishing, camping were both way up at the state parks in our region that access these lakes.
Yeah, I've got a lake in Kent County. It's Urieville Lake. You've probably driven by it on the
Right.
American byways now. It used to be National Scenic Byways, but it's American now. I think they just changed the designation. And by, I guess, July or August, you can't even get a rowboat on that lake because of the algae bloom is so thick. I mean,
Isn't that so?
isn't it? I mean, it is true, isn't it?
It is true. I think that's true. They mentioned hydrilla. Hydrilla is a very invasive species that will frankly ruin the use of many of these lakes for recreational purposes and public use purposes if not properly managed, because it just, it grows like a weed, because it is a weed, and it basically chokes off the use of the lakes for a lot of purposes if you don't manage it.
Yeah. Well, I think my final comments is several of these lakes are designated as fishing management areas, or they're designated for fishing, and with the amount of growth in them, that I don't know how the fish can even survive. Wouldn't you agree with that?
That has been a concern expressed by some folks with DNR and the Fisheries Service in prior years. I'm aware of that, yes.
I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Beitzel, welcome back to the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing us to appear before your committee today to hear this important bill. Delegate Buckle, I think your family has property at Deep Creek Lake, and that they've been there for many years, and your ancestors, some families from Deep Creek Lake.
Yes.
You live in Allegheny County, and I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but the guy from DNR that manages this program of the funds that we've been able to get is Bruce Michaels, and he's manages these funds and has distributed the funds in every lake. Every year he comes up with projects that he uses for every lake. Those lakes is Lake Habib in Allegheny County. And I know with your knowledge of Deep Creek Lake, Allegheny County is an area you represent.
I represent Lake Habib. Rocky Gap is the eastern edge of my district, yes.
And it's had some issues, as Nicole mentioned, about invasive species, and hydrilla being one of them. What is the value, or what is the impact of would be the impact of Allegheny County if you would lose the water quality in that lake?
It would be tremendous. Rocky Gap, not only the casino resort, but I hope many of you have had the opportunity to be there over the years. The casino resort itself is actually owned. The property is owned by the state. It's within the state park. The state park wraps around Lake Habib. It is one of our primary drawers of tourist dollars and participation. The state park itself is routinely full of people. And I can tell you, quite frankly, when they do surveys, it's full of a lot of people from Montgomery County and Prince George's County. A lot of folks find it to be one of the nicest places in the state, within an easy hour-and-a-half, 2-hour drive to go spend a day. And it's eligible for boating, fishing, recreational use, families, and what's happening if the hydrilla and the other invasive species are not properly maintained and managed, it it's just unusable, and it would be disastrous, for us in our western part of the state. But also there's lakes that are included in this program in Montgomery County, the Eastern Shore, St. Mary's County, Charles County. So I think the same issues can really affect all of us if we don't take care of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Not at all. Delegate Clark and Delegate Dana, could you take over for a minute or two? Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is a question for Delegate Krim on appropriations. Is any of the bay restoration funds used to go to help maintain these lakes? And if not, is that an idea that maybe we should put forward? Because these lakes, a lot of them, Deep Creek is way up West Maryland, but a lot of these lakes are in areas that could affect Chesapeake Bay. And maybe that would be an appropriate use of some of the extra money we have in the Bay Restoration Fund.
Well, that's certainly a proposal, Delegate. You could perhaps make that proposal, maybe do a bill. Maybe we could ask the bill sponsor here if he's considered Bay Restoration Funds. I think Delegate Beitzel, of course, is also on the same subcommittee as myself, and which is Transportation and Environment.
Can I say something about bay restoration?
Yes.
Bay restoration
Yes.
are meant for bay restoration and not this.
Yeah, and I mean, I could say that, that it's not our intent to take any type of funding away from anywhere else. I think that we all know the status of our budget. We all know bills that we pass every year. And we think that this is a rational request for an amount of money that is not a trivial amount of money at all. We certainly understand that. But when you factor in the purposes, the environmental and ecological and public use purposes behind the request, we believe that $3 million is a fair and rational way to allocate our funding. We allocate that level of money for a wide variety of other programs, and they're good programs, and this is a good program too.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was just a thought process.
Sure.
Seems to be some excess funds there, and the lakes kind of work in with the bay and the tributaries and everything. So it seems like it'd be a reasonable use of the money.
Okay. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much. Delegate Vogel, you mentioned the beach restoration replenishment program in Ocean City. Is this legislation modeled on that?
I don't know that it's modeled on it, but I think that there are potentially some corollaries between the two.
Okay.
This is something that really has existed. This fund existed for several years, but it was a purely discretionary fund. And it was very difficult to undertake and do the projects because you just didn't know if there were going to be money there until you saw the governor's budget, so to speak. So what we wanted to do, what Delegate Beitzel was a primary driver in doing several years ago, was making sure that we got at least $1 million so that DNR could plan.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of that. The other question I had was, this bill proposes that the $3 million be in perpetuity. Is that correct?
I think that that's the way that the bill is written. Obviously, all of us understanding our budgetary purposes, that's not necessary. If you wanted to put a sunset upon that $3 million, I think that's something that we could work with and accept, and that would make it subject to further review by future legislatures about how the program's working and how much money is needed. I think Delegate Healy, to be fair, the main reason it was probably drafted that way is the sunset was expiring, and we didn't really want to bargain against ourselves by putting another sunset in the original legislation. But if the committee feels that we can increase the funding level and then put another sunset a few years down the road so that it can come back and take a look at it, I think that that's a rational position.
Well, thank you very much for saying I'm rational. That's nice.
I've always found you to be eminently rational.
As I know that you serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and I know
For
that
better or worse.
that both Chairman Barvey and I are former members of that esteemed committee. And
Yes.
I know that
Refugees.
Sheila Hickson spoke fondly of you all the time. Well, predominantly you, Delegate Healy. Delegate Barvey.
I was I was the vice chair for 10 years with Chairman Hickson. We were very close and we did a lot of work. But the point I want to make is that as somebody who serves on Ways and Means, you know very well that it's the first thing I learned. There is no such thing as a free lunch. There's only so many places and ways to get money. You can raise taxes, you can cut services, or you can take money from other programs. And you're saying you don't want to take money from other programs. So which of the other two do you want to do? You want to raise taxes to do this?
I'm not going to do that. I'm not the budgetary expert. That's certainly why appropriations has corresponding jurisdiction with your committee of the bill. But I would suggest that in a some $1 billion budget from year to year, that doing the math of that, certainly that there are opportunities as our budget expands, as our economy expands, as things expand, to find additional funds for this program. And I guess in response to that, I would say, we all just voted. I think we all voted for the COVID relief bill because that was a good idea and it was a good package. It was billions of dollars that, so I think we can find, I think the appropriations wizards can find a way to better finance this without causing us to have to raise taxes.
Well, that was my Ways and Means question. It was a question we always ask when somebody comes asking for money is, whose ox is going to get gored so that you can have this money for this program?
Right. When I was on Ways and Means, it was my job to ask everybody who had a tax cut bill where their list of spending cuts were. And strangely, they felt that was somebody else's job.
It's a difficult job, but we do it. We voted the I-10 bill this week. That's a $60-some million hit every year as scored by DLS to our budget. But the General Assembly has done that because the weight of the body believes that that's a worthwhile policy and that that's what we should do. And I would argue that this, in a similar sense, this is something that we should do for our lakes. They're not my lakes. They're not Delegate Beitzel's lakes. They're lakes as Marylanders. They're shared and enjoyed by hundreds of thousands of people a year. And they're just going to go downhill.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any further questions for the sponsor or the witness in favor? Seeing none then. Thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 833.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. Let's turn to House Bill 635. The Prince George's County delegation presenting would be Delegate Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, yeah, I'm right here. For the record, Delegate Julian Ivey presenting House Bill 635 on behalf of the Prince George's County delegation. House Bill 635, as amended, requires the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, MEMA, the Maryland Department of Transportation, MDOT, and the Maryland Department of Environment, MDE, to study flooding in Prince George's County and Montgomery County as well. First, the study is required to analyze historic and recent flooding. Flooding as recent as September 10th specifically has been highlighted in the legislation. Second, must evaluate existing and potential flood prevention and control measures, including physical infrastructure. Third, it must examine environmental issues associated with flooding in the counties. Lastly, the study must develop recommendations, and really this is the important part, including long and short-term solutions to address the impacts of flooding and associated counties. By October 15th of 2021, corresponding agencies must report the findings and recommendations to the governor, the Prince George's and Montgomery County House and Senate delegations, on the presiding officers of each chamber. The fiscal note on this bill is significant due to the required costs for the agencies responsible for hiring a third-party contractor to conduct the review. However, the $2.7 million fiscal note on this bill pales in comparison to the total value of properties that are situated in Prince George's and Montgomery counties floodplains. Flooding becomes more prevalent as climate patterns become more extreme due to climate change. We need to have an assured understanding of the flood mitigation systems and structures in place to protect these vulnerable properties in these respective counties. I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 635. I do also have a letter of support from the Montgomery County delegation supporting this legislation, specifically the include them in the study. And I also have various municipalities in both counties supporting the legislation as well. Thank you.
Right. The mayor of the town of Somerset didn't meet our deadline, but he's going to be supplying written testimony, which will, of course, enter into the record. We have a question. Delegate Wyville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so the original bill only included Prince George's and now Montgomery's added. Do you know what that would do to the fiscal note? I assume it would go up.
Certainly, it would go up.
But we don't have a new fiscal note?
We don't have a new fiscal note yet.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other questions for the delegate from Prince George's County? Seeing none, you're free to, oh, wait, somebody want to have a question? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, you're free to go, Delegate Ivy.
Thank you so much.
Take care. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 635. Let's proceed to House Bill 693, the Cecil County delegation. Delegate Hornberger is representing them. Delegate Hornberger, are you there?
He's just now in the waiting room. Give him a
Okay.
second.
We'll wait.
All right, he should be there.
Okay, Delegate Hornberger. He's probably feeling woozy from the off-gassing of electric car batteries.
Hey, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Welcome to the committee. You've got 4 minutes. Take it away.
Okay. Thanks for the record, Delegate Kevin Hornberger, here on behalf of HB 693, which is a local bill titled Cecil County Fishing Restrictions. And what the purpose of this bill is to basically lift some prohibitions that go back so far we can't even find their genesis in terms of setting of pound nets specifically in the waters that surround Cecil County. The bill seeks to bring us in line with other jurisdictions, such as Kent County, where pound nets are used a little bit more frequently. And the concept here of repealing the language that we have currently is that it sets forth that you have to have permission from a landowner in order to set a net out in front of their property. And the reason that's troublesome now is that we have condos on the shore. We also have the Elk Neck State Park. And then we also have Perry Point, one owned by the Fed, one owned by the state. And getting permission from the state/federal government is nearly impossible. And as a result, these netters aren't able to put their nets out front of these properties. The bill also seeks to clean up some language, and I've got some visuals here because, we can't share. So if you look at Cecil versus Harford County, the area that I have, and this is what the amendment addresses in blue, we've prepared an amendment that would preserve the ability for hunting that takes place there in the form of a body booting or by gunboat. And the language that was in the bill originally was so old that it didn't include Harford County. So that's what the amendment addresses, and it puts it in the right section of code to protect that during hunting season. And then in terms of the pound net, just for education of the committee, a pound net is simply a net that uses directional ability to send the fish along a vertical net and then into a hoop catchment area. All of the fish stay alive. The commercial fisherman then comes and empties out the hoop area. And then in terms of bycatch, in other words, if there's fish in there that shouldn't be, they are released live. So I know there might be some advocates or folks that testify, but the size of this net is regulated by the state so that fish don't get caught in there. And then all fish that are not supposed to be in there get released back to the wild. So there's very minimal impact on the bycatch. And again, this is practice all over the state. We just wanted the availability to do it in Cecil. We have some folks that are testifying on behalf of the bill with the Waterman Association, and just wanted to reiterate that this bill is supported by the delegation, the Cecil County Council, and the county executive. And with that, I'd like to take any questions. Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we'll go through all the advocates, the people who agree, and then we'll entertain questions. But before I recognize James Mullen, Timothy Mortis, Robert T., and Jim Klein, I have to say, I don't consider this to be a local bill because it deals with a state resource. So
Okay.
I don't know how I feel
Fair
about
enough.
the bill, but I don't consider it to be a local bill, even though your delegation put it forward. So why don't we?
If I could to that,
originally, well, I'll give you a chance at the end when we, I'll call on you first, and then we'll ask questions of all of you guys. So, James Mullen, are you out there?
Right here.
Okay, great. James, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of this bill just because it updates the language in existing law that brings us in conformity with state law and surrounding jurisdictions. Really, this dates back to when we had waterfront farms in Cecil County, and the landowners didn't want competing landowners to set pound nets out in front of their own property. So that's why you had to ask permission of the landowner. And to Delegate Hornberger's point, over time, as some of the farms, waterfront farms, have been developed into condominiums or subdivided into housing communities, to ask permission, I mean, you'd have to, in a condo complex, everybody that's technically in that building, or in a residential waterfront subdivision, you'd have to go to every single homeowner. And in practicality, the logistics is just encumbersome. So that's why I'm voicing in favor of this bill to bring it in line with other jurisdictions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
Next, let's hear Timothy Mortis. Timothy, welcome back to the committee.
Hello.
There we go. There we go.
Hi, Chairman. I'm Tim Mortis, President, Cecil Hartford Watermen's Association, second Vice President of the Maryland Watermen's Association. As said by Delegate Hornberger and Mr. Mullins, this is just cleaning up stuff that dates back to the 1800s. In Cecil County, the pound net law, for Elk Neck and the Cecil County shore, that was, to stop tenant farmers and neighboring farmers from competing in the shad and herring fishery that we no longer have anymore. So, and landowners' permission is kind of hindering guys from catching some catfish late in the summer on a bad crab year and such. And it would also bring us in compliance with the rest of the state. I mean, this isn't needed elsewhere. Why do we need it in Cecil County? As far as the part in the bill about the stakes in Susquehanna River, this predates the Conowingo Dam. There are no DNR pound net sites in Susquehanna River, so there will never be any pound nets. We wanted that changed. There's a small section of shore on the VA hospital in Perryville where someone could set a couple of small fyke nets during the yellow perch fishery, which is open right now. Instead of having to try to use 4 anchors, we would just drive 4 3-foot stakes in the ground to hold this net. It was never an intention to set pound nets in Susquehanna River because it just cannot be done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next, let's welcome back to the committee, Robert T. Brown. Robert T., how are you doing? Robert? Well, he was there. I saw him.
He's right here.
Oh, there he is. He has to unmute himself. It's on the lower left-hand side, the thing that looks like a microphone with a slash through it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
I can. How are you doing, Robert?
All right, doing fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee for giving me a few minutes to speak on this. This fishery, this poundhead fishery is done throughout the state. And we run into problems like this up into Cecil County, which is making it encumbersome for the fellows to be able to set a net. It's only a few people who would probably be doing it. We don't have the shad fishery. We don't have the herring fishery anymore. Both of those are gone. They're outlawed. We're not allowed to keep any. The pound net keeps fish alive. They swim alive into it until you get there. So when you discard these fish, when you cull them out over a culling board, you're not hurting them. One thing it does bring, though, we do have these invasive species of blue catfish, which are starting in that area very much, and we need to be able to catch them, and plus the channel cats and a few other fish. So hopefully we can get favorable out of this committee, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And last but not least, Jim Klein. Jim?
I'd like to thank the committee for hearing us today on this matter. I am Jim Klein. I'm a Cecil County waterman. I've been a waterman pretty much my whole life. I have worked all over the Bay, but Cecil County is where I call home. This bill is not going to allow anything that's not already allowed. It's just going to relieve us from the cumbersome burden we have of trying to get written permission to set a pound net in a site. I mean, I currently have sites that I've had for numerous years that were my family's for years before that, from back when this bill was probably written. The current law was probably written in the 1800s. And the purpose of it is, as some of the other folks have said, is back then there was a lot of tenant farmers. There's land barons owned these farms right here, and there was tenant farmers on them. My grandfather was a tenant farmer. He never owned a pound net or a fishing license his entire life, but he fished every year until the herring and shad fishery was gone. He fished for the land baron that owned that farm, and it was a land baron's net, and they just split the proceeds. And that's no longer the case. So I have those sites, but I get written permission from the current landowner. And 2 years later, they sell their home, and the new landowner comes along. And then I have to go through that process again. In a lot of cases, as I said earlier, it might be a condo association or a homeowners association that actually owns the beach, not an individual landowner, which makes it where you have to go get written permission from the condo association or the homeowners association, which virtually makes it impossible because you're dealing with maybe 30 or 40 landowners opposed to one landowner. And if 30 or 40 landowners, some of them who may be 3/4 to a half a mile from the actual water.
If you could start to wrap up, the committee would appreciate that. I know people have questions.
Okay, and that's why we need to change this and get in accordance with the rest of the state. It's not allowing us to do something that we're not already doing. I currently have pound net set right now as we speak.
Okay, if you could.
That's it's just getting rid of the written permission part of it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, before I start recognizing questions, Delegate Hornberger, you wanted to respond to my comment regarding local versus not local?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with you, and then also qualify that the amendment seeks to rectify the flats area and protect that, so that would rope in part of the waterway as well. So that's why we offered that amendment. But you are
okay. So the first question will go to Delegate Ruth, then Delegate Jacobs, then Delegate Healy in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Thank you so much. The first question I heard mentioned that other jurisdictions have this. Which other jurisdictions allow it?
So So all other county jurisdictions in the state allow these nets as long as you, A, notify DNR where the net is being placed, and then B, you have to check that routinely. In other words, these nets can't just be abandoned. They have to be serviced to make sure that there's no fish in there that die. So we're really one of the only jurisdictions that still has this archaic language.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned, so DNR's letter talks about, possibly interfering with the spawning of the rockfish, the herring and the shad. You mentioned that as fish are caught there that aren't supposed to be caught, you release them, but doesn't that cause stress on the fish that could increase mortality?
So the fish are basically swimming into what we'll call a pen, for lack of a better word. And when they're in that pen, they can swim freely, eat other fish, etc. It's just a quarantined area almost. And then once they're released, there's no actual. It's actually better for the fish than, let's say, a hook and line where you're actually piercing the fish's mouth. And then there's other nets that are called gill nets, where the fish swims into the net and gets stuck behind its gill. So this is actually the least intrusive method. And coincidentally, it's the best method to catch the invasive fish, which are the catfish that are supplanting our native and indigenous species that are there at the top of the bay spawning.
Thank you, Delegate. Just one more question. Would this interfere with the ability of the landowners to use their riparian rights for recreational purposes, recreational fishing, boating, whatever?
So there is already a standoff in place. If you go to the DNR website, there's a buff. I know this is hard to see, and I'm trying to be.
Yeah.
The DNR specifies set-offs for landowners on both the Cecil and Hartford side. So the Cecil side is, I believe, 400 yards, and then it's 800 yards on the Hartford side. So, you think of, like, I own the beachfront property. You can't come and set an area that's in that tidal zone where the tide goes in and out. So fishing from the shore, swimming, all of those recreational type things you can still do because the net has to be set outside of that tidal area. So that would be preserved.
Thank you so much, Delegate.
Mm-hmm.
Delegate Hornberger, before I recognize Delegate Jacobs, were you the one who came before us earlier in the session with the humane snare traps?
Yes.
So this is like the snare trap equivalent for fishies.
Yes, I love all animals and God's creatures. I want to treat them best.
I'm sorry, I just can't. I can't let a straight line go by. Okay, Delegate Jacobs.
Keeping with that program, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Hornberger, would you tell the committee how you did fishing on my boat this fall?
I was able to catch my limit of rockfish and then cook them up for dinner later that night. And I just, want to thank Delegate for that experience. It was very wholesome.
It was all good. Thank you. I just want to let them know that I can catch rockfish.
You the man.
All right. No, but let's get serious.
Okay. You have a serious question. Okay.
No, I do have some serious question. Jimmy Klein, I know you have pound nets set now. Isn't that correct? Or you have pound sites in Cecil County.
I have sites, and I currently even have a net fishing right now, and I'll have another one fishing by the end of the week. Yes, yeah, I currently have sites and nets.
But you've had pound net sets for many years, as you indicated earlier. Your family had them, and now you're setting them. I know you called me a couple of years ago about this issue, and we looked it up, and then it went back so many years they couldn't even find when it started. But couple of questions I have. One, I think Robert T. touched on it. we have a serious problem with the invasive blue cats in the Chesapeake Bay. Are you able to catch any of those up there with your pound nets?
That's the most effective way to catch them. It's more effective than any other way I've found. And catfish is my main fishery, and that the pound net is the most effective way to catch those blue cats.
Right. And I think in DNR's letter, they referenced something about the Susquehanna River. And I haven't talked much about Conowingo Dam this year, but I thought I'd find an opportunity with this bill. But it would virtually be impossible to set a pound net in the Susquehanna River with the amount of debris and tide and sediment and nutrients and whoever knows, some cars, a few houses by. Isn't that so?
Yeah, it's impossible to set one in Susquehanna River for all the reasons you just mentioned, plus the fact that 99% of your bottom in the Susquehanna River proper is rock bottom. You can't get pound net poles in that rock bottom, and if you did, that downflow is so fierce in there that the net wouldn't stay there anyway. It would knock it over. And the trash, the Susquehanna River basically is off limits by Mother Nature's doing, not by the state's.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting that DNR put that in their testimony about the Susquehanna River, when I really wanted you to tell the committee, because I know you're an active pound net fisherman, it's impossible to set a pound net in the Susquehanna River, and you would not be wanting to do so. Isn't that true?
That's correct. It's impossible to do it in there, and it's also impossible to do it several other locations, not only in Cecil County waters, but in all the waters of the bay, because of, you just can't ride along, say, I think I'm going to set a pound net here because it looks like a good spot and there's nobody here to bother me, because a pound net is a piece of equipment you construct and use in the area you construct it for. You can't build one for area A and then next year set it in area B, because the tide, the current, the depth, the type of bottom, all that plays into where and how you set a pound net. And the Susquehanna River doesn't have anywheres in it that you can set a pound net.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure that issue was put to sleep. But, it's a highly regulated industry, the pound net industry, and you have to go through, it's virtually impossible to even get a site anymore. Most of them are historic. So, I guess you're fortunate that you have some sites up in Cecil County. So really, the fact that Cecil is the only county that has this requirement of signatures, as you said earlier, has been a problem with the way it's implemented in today's world. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And this bill is not asking to allow us to do anything we're not already allowed to do. It's just asking to allow us to continue doing it without having to acquire written permission from the landowner.
All right, so let me ask one final question for now, Mr. Chairman. In the Sassafras River, you have Kent on one side and Cecil on the other side. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, what's the rules in the Sassafras River for setting pound nets?
On the Kent County side, you just contact the DNR, get a approved site from the DNR's fisheries, and set your pound net. On the Cecil County side, you contact the DNR, give them your site and get that approved from the DNR. And then you have to get written permission from the landowner. The DNR gives you a approved site, gives you their permission to set it, and then you get the permission from the landowner. And if you get the site from the DNR and the landowner don't give you the permission, then you can't use the site. And you can go right across the river on the Kent County side and set one without the landowner's permission, with just the DNR's permission. And it's that way everywhere in the state except for Cecil County. And in the Sassafras River, we have a lot of Kent County watermen that fish on the Cecil County side. And and Cecil County watermen that fish on the Kent County side. But in the Sassafras River, it's the same body of water. It's basically governed, well, it is governed by the same state agency, but the law on the written permission is only implied on the Cecil County side of the river.
I thank you for that. I think it's important that the committee understand, even in a river that has a county on either side, that the rules are applied differently. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Hornberger, did you say, I wasn't clear, did you say that the amendment that you were going to be offering had to do with the DNR message about the Susquehanna River? Or would you be in support of an amendment that would say the Susquehanna River is not included in this? If that would, give DNR more comfort.
Yeah, we don't have any problem with that. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Because they're not going to be netting there anyway.
Okay, any further questions for the sponsor or any of his supporters? Seeing none, we'll go to the witness signed up against the bill, Larry Jennings. Larry, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Barve, members of the committee. I'm Larry Jennings, a volunteer with Coastal Conservation Association, Maryland. We oppose this bill primarily because of where it is and the status of the species already mentioned. This is a springtime gathering point where all of the striped bass, rockfish, shad, and herring all come in from the ocean and come up to this area for spawning. They are congregated close together and they are difficult to monitor. We don't know how many there are, how many can be taken, but these species all depend upon this area and they need to be able to continue their spawning runs because they are all in trouble. Many of you should be aware that striped bass are really in dire straits again. They need protection. They need easy spawning. And if the large cow females are put in a pound net, it's not likely they're going to have a successful spawning year. All of these species need protection, and these are very large nets up to 1,200 feet, I believe it is, in Cecil County. So the rivers around there, the Sassafras, all of these rivers are getting these spring run spawns that will now be subject to collection in a pound net. And if you think pound nets are safe for releasing all of the non-targeted species, please look at our written testimony. Yes, that is a sturgeon. It is a federally protected endangered species. The size of it tells you it's 30 years old, and that's not going to go back and swim again. We don't want this kind of fate for our striped bass, and we urge you to give this bill an unfavorable vote. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Jennings? Ann, is your hand up for him, or did you
I was
have
going to
it?
put it up again anyway, so.
Okay, go ahead then.
Thank you very much. I do want to understand this because for the advocates against this bill seems to be addressing something that's like a historic anomaly in the law. It's not really a policy that they can't do this. It's just that they have to get permission from the landowners. So the landowners can give permission and they can do it. So wouldn't your position be better served by putting in a bill that says during spawning time, you can't catch fish in this area at all or something like that? Mr. Jennings?
That might be a possibility. It was really difficult to figure out what this bill was. Where it came from in the code for pound nets and all. If there were no pound nets in the water, it might be acceptable, but generally in most places, these pound nets are erected and are sitting there year round with the nets out. And
But that's allowed now, that's allowed under current law if you get the permission of the landowners. So I don't see how this bill actually addresses what you're trying to do.
Well, we believe it will allow a big increase in the number of pound nets in the rivers and around the flats there, which is a prime gathering point in the spring for all those species.
Okay, thank you.
Larry, let me ask you your opinion about an argument that's offered by the proponents. Basically, they're saying that this is the only place in the state which has this requirement, and they just want to be treated the same as other jurisdictions when it comes to this kind of net fishing. What do you say to that?
I have some sympathy for that, but at the same time, other areas of the bay don't have the spawning activity right there at the front door like the head of the bay does. Most of these species, a lot of them used to go up, the shads, the herrings, the Susquehanna was a huge spawning mat. But if you put a pound net down by Perryville or something, that's essentially all those fish starting to enter the funnel that goes into the Susquehanna River. And they are not always harvested regularly. So if they have big crowds in there, it's not uncommon to have a lot of dead fish in those nets. And we just don't believe it's the right place and timing to do this. If you carved out some sort of, before the 1st of June or 1st of July, after that, they would be fine. I think we would have much less trouble with that. But again, this hasn't even gone through the standard DNR process for scoping and all that. That would normally be done with fisheries management and should allow the managers to work on these rules and then take it before the Sport Fish Advisory Commission and Tidal Fish Advisory Commissions, neither of which have seen any or heard anything about this bill that we know of.
Okay, Doug Jacobs.
Well, Mr. Jennings made some comments that I don't necessarily agree with. First of all, Mr. Chairman, I think you were on the mark when you talked, or was it Delegate Healy, about the permitted fishery right now. The only thing
that was Ann. That was Ann.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was Delegate Healy, but the only thing they're asking is to take that written permission piece out of it. It's a highly regulated industry, so you can't just go set a net anywhere you want. I want the committee to understand it, but isn't it true, Mr. Jennings, you said that those nets are up year round, but isn't it true that when there's ice in the bay, you can't set a pound net because the ice would take every pole down and the net would be gone?
In that area, you may get the ice, but in other areas with saltier water that doesn't ice up as much, I've seen some very late and very early in the year. I can't say January and February, but there's nets out there that I see seemingly year round.
Well, pound nets in the upper bay are definitely prone to ice. I know that there are many months of the year they can't even set those nets, but it's a highly regulated industry, and they would have to follow DNR regulations. Isn't that true?
Yes, as well as they can be enforced.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions for Mr. Jennings? And I think he's the only other person who's signed up to testify. If not, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 693. Let's go to the last bill of the afternoon, which by the
Mr. Chair,
invitation to ask 5 million questions. But Delegate Howard, you're here with Sane, House Bill 843.
Yeah, Delegate Howard, for the record, Delegate Howard, pleased to present 843, Anne Arundel County Bill, fishing with a hull seine. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, colleagues, thanks for having me. This is a revisit from last year's 2020 legislative session, HB 95, which passed the delegation, this committee, and the floor of the House of Delegates unanimously, all unanimously. This bill, again, comes with a letter of support from both the delegation and DNR. This bill is in the exact posture as HB 95 was last year, except in so much as per the request of the Severn River, we carved them out of this bill. I took the opportunity, since we weren't able to get to this bill basically on the Senate side last year due to COVID, the request came in to carve out the Severn River. And I had called that amendment in last year. And of course, everybody remembers the hectic nature and of unfortunately last year's session and the year after that. But so I went ahead and took the opportunity and honored the request of the Severn River and carved them out of the bill. And I asked for a favorable report.
Okay. The following people are signed up in favor of the bill. William Serbo, Robert T. Brown, well, those two. So William, are you out there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please proceed. Welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Delegate Howard, thank him. As he said, this is a revisit from last year, and we actually have given up half of the county to appease the more populated parts of the county, but this bill is just putting us on par with the rest of the state who are allowed to haul seine. And in this time of COVID, I would like to say that this bill is even more important to watermen because as we have been reading about the oyster market and the rockfish market, this will allow some watermen to fall back on some other avenue of trying to pay the rent. And this bill just would bring us on par with the rest of the state who already can do this fishery. This, as you all were talking earlier about some ancient wording in some laws, somehow Anne Arundel County got left out years ago, and this is just trying to bring the county back to more of a even with the rest of the state. And I would hope some folks here, since you approved it last year, would try to communicate to some of the folks in the Senate who were kind of dragging their feet on this bill to help pass it along. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Seth, do you have a Senate cross file just before I recognize Robert T?
Let me look here real quick because there's a couple of people interested in cross file.
Well, I'll tell you what, while you're looking, I'll recognize Robert T. Robert?
Okay.
Chair, members of this committee, my name is Robert T. Brown, President of the Maryland Watermen's Association. I haul seine down here in St. Mary's in Charles County and have done it up into the Patuxent River. This fishery is, a lot of it is a new fishery that we haven't had before. One of the main fish that we catch this time of year is what is called gizzard shad. Gizzard shad is a bait fish. It's not you can't eat it. It's too many bones into it, but it is processed when we catch it. It is, they freeze it and they ship it down to Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi for crawfish bait. And it is a good bait for this, for their fishery down there. And we do pretty well with it. It is a new fishery that came up because we always discarded before we didn't do it. Also, it's a invasive species of blue catfish. We catch them into it, and even the snakeheads. This is a fishery that is needed and it helps to take the pressure off oystering and some other fishing that they do, like for the yellow perch and all. It's a new fishery that has been done into that area, and it would be very beneficial to the watermen in that area. Plus, getting these blue catfish out. A lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of the fish that we have, the small rock, the small perch, are all eaten by these blue catfish. They grow as much as, I've seen them 60, 70, and I've heard of them bigger than that, pounds. And they're just an eating machine, and we need to get them out. And catching those gizzard shad would be very valuable to the commercial fishing industry in that area. And thank you very much.
Okay, Robert. Staff tells me that there is no cross file. So
That's correct. That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
I talked to Big Ed about it a little bit, and I think if memory serves me correct, and I think it does, the conversation sort of went down like he wanted to cross file, or at least was entertaining it, and by the time I just got backed up by the time it was time to drop bills. So I just went ahead and dropped it.
Yeah, okay. So first question goes to Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've been getting a lot of email about this bill. And some of the emails mention that this would bring, extensive commercial fishing to an area that hasn't had that before. Has anything been done to look into the impact that commercial fishing might have on the ecosystem?
Well, I can't speak to the impact, but I can speak to the fact that those groups were not present at the delegation meetings where we voted on and heard this bill, both last session and this session.
Thank you. And actually, several of the emails mentioned that the delegation did not solicit input from community associations or other local residents.
Well, we certainly do publish all the bills, both individually on a legislative, on the MGA website.
Okay, but you didn't do any specific outreach to communities in the area?
No.
Okay, thank you. And would this interfere
Same as
with
last year, quite frankly, Delegate Ruth.
Well, I guess we didn't get these emails last year. I don't know, but I'm just responding to the emails that we.
Yeah, and quite frankly, but just two people talking over a fence post, and I was too, in that, Severn River asked to be carved out of it, and we went ahead and did that. So.
Great. And would this interfere with recreational uses of the water?
I'll let go ahead, Robert, or if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, it's Robert T. A whole seine is not a permanent fixture that is put into the river. When you go to whole seine, you just put one in the shallow water in close to shore, and you just lay the net out and sweep it around and close it off, and you catch what's in that area that's there, and then you call your fish out and you take the net up and you leave. It's not like a pound net would just sit there. It's not like crab pots or eel pots. I mean, it's a piece of gear that is taken up and moved in a matter of hours. Unless you have a good amount of fish, it might take a little longer.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Next question goes to Delegate Jacobs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The primary catch, I believe, would be gizzard shad, isn't that so?
Yes.
I mean, they're not, primary use of this is not going after striped bass and perch and that thing. I think the primary use of these nets, as was testified, is gizzard shad. I just wanted to verify that. And Robert T., I have a question for you.
Okay.
Before we hear from the opponents, I'm sure they're going to talk about the overfishing of striped bass. Could you tell the committee what the quota was this year, commercial quota, and then what was harvested?
The commercial quota was, I'm trying to remember the exact amount. Anyhow, it was like 1.4 million pounds, and we're like 300 to 400 pounds below our quota.
300,000 to 400,000?
Less, yes.
Then what the state allowed for the quota to be caught, is that correct?
Yes, and as far as it goes for rockfish, catching rockfish up in that area, you only allowed so many fish to catch regardless your quota. Everybody's got a individual quota who whole seines, and they're only allowed so many fish per year, whether they catch them in a whole seine, a pound net, or a gill net. It's multiple gears, but they only have one quota. So most of them, the reason that they didn't catch most of the quota this year was not for the shortage of fish. I want to make that very clear. It was because of the markets. The markets went down as low as $1 a pound for rockfish, and we wouldn't fish for them for that because you can't wait no more than what you're allowed. You can't make any money at it at that low quota, and we better off to let them swim and spawn, and maybe we'll have some after this virus is over with. All our markets have been suspended very much this year. And as far as it goes, catching these mudshad, most of these mudshad that they catch is during the month of January, February, and the first part of March. That's when they school up in these areas in the head of these rivers. And after the river's frozen in January, you'll catch some later on. But during the summer months, there's market for it, but people would prefer the crab, fish, and clam.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I add something to that?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I know one of your other members was asking questions about stressing the fish and things that are caught. But everybody's thinking rockfish, but these nets are mostly used when the water is cool or cold, and handling the fish at that time when the water is cool is a lot less stressful on the fish than, say, handling them in July and June and August when the rest of the world was out there playing with rockfish. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that.
Okay. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Howard. So I have a couple of questions. The first is about, in looking at this bill, I don't see any references, unless it's elsewhere in the law, to restrictions on like the size of these nets. I think in Virginia there's 1,000-yard maximum, and then there are rules in Virginia about how far out. Like, you can't take them more than a mile out from where they were deployed. Does that exist? Does that kind of thing, those limitations exist somewhere else in the law and was not meant to be addressed in this bill?
It's my, I'm looking at the bill, and it does talk about not to exceed 1,500 feet, not to exceed, a braille line may not exceed 750 feet. It also talks about some of the depths as far as catching and releasing these fish. So I do believe that there's adequate restrictions incorporated in the bill.
Okay, so unlike Virginia, there's no language about connecting 2 or more nets together and going so many miles from where you deploy it. Just Maryland law is silent on that, I guess.
Can I answer this?
Sure.
Yeah. Look, in the state of Maryland, it is illegal to hook onto a whole seine with 2 boats and drag it down the river. You got to start one in on shore and come around. Different counties have different lengths. St. Mary's County, the length of it is 1,800 feet. Charles County is 960 feet. I think it's a little over 1,000 feet. I don't know exactly what it is already in existing law. We have many laws. These nets are, most of the time, they are measured. They're only allowed to be so many feet deep and certain size meshes into it. It's very highly regulated.
Okay, Mr. Brown, thank you for that. Without going really deep into this area of the law, why is it different county by county? Is that based on the conditions, the waterways where this kind of net is being used? Why would it be different from one county to the next?
It has to do with the open body of waters that you got. In St. Mary's County, you have wider areas and wider rivers. You're only allowed to go like a third of a way apart across of a river in most areas. So, I mean, they give fish, a chance. But it depends on, like St. Mary's County, our rivers down here are big. Our Potomac River is wide, like 7 miles wide. And
Okay.
that's the reason for the different restrictions.
Okay. Okay. So my other questions, Delegate Howard, similar to Delegate Ruth, in response to some of these emails I've gotten, worried about, what you do about byproducts that are caught. So somebody said, I think Delegate Jacobs talked about how these are really only intended for certain kinds of shad or mud shad. But what if yellow perch and other species are caught? I don't think I saw penalty language in here. How can that be enforced? And what is your response to those emails, critical of this approach, saying there's going to be, other species, including endangered ones like yellow perch?
Robert, to your, or.
Okay, look, this is something, when you get your fish in a hole seine, you have what we call a pocket on the net. And they vary in size depending on where you're fishing at, but it's a deep piece of net. And you have the fish in there, and the fish are still alive, the fish are swimming, and you can cull them over a culling board if you have to. Sometimes you can take a hand net and bail them in the boat and just pick out, like if you see a small perch, you pick it out. If you see, anything that is illegal, you're not allowed to put the fish out in any less than 6 inches of water. You got to have more water in that to make sure that the fish is able to survive and get out in deeper water. I mean, we're very highly regulated on that. And the way the penalties are, if we are caught with illegal fish, we would not stay in business if we didn't do it right.
Okay, so again, the penalties must be elsewhere in law because they're not spelled out in this bill. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, I think what he's speaking to, Delegate Lehman, is in what you're talking about and asking about is the means in which a haul seine is used. And it's my understanding, and Robert and Bill, you can help clear me up on this if I'm incorrect, is my understanding that it's essentially a catch and release system, in that if there's a fish that doesn't meet a standard, or there's a fish in the net that you're not supposed to be catching, you just put it back in the water. I mean, these things are basically swimming around in a big pool, from my understanding, inside of the net. You just scoop them out and go, well, that one we didn't want to catch that yellow perch, and you just put it out over the side of the net or the boat or whatever. And I think what DNR is speaking to is to make sure that it lessens the impact on any fish caught, that the water has to be a certain depth, those types of things. But much to Robert T's point, if you're caught with anything that you're not supposed to be catching, regardless, there are severe penalties already in statute.
Yeah, actually, committee counsel advises me that the general penalty structure in the fisheries would apply in this instance. We can get more details for you, Delegate Lehman.
Thank you.
Yeah, any
Appreciate
more
it.
questions, Mary? You done?
I think, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I believe, and Regina, I can't see your last name.
Boyce. I was about to recognize her.
Sorry.
It's all good. Thanks, Delegate, for seeing my hand raised, and as well as the chair. I had a question, and I think it's the opposite to what folks have been asking, and it has already been raised. I do apologize. I had to manage a constituent issue, so I was not here. So I'm really sorry. But there have been questions about understanding that maybe this is just kind of capturing like the gizzard and the shard and the carp and the catfish. And knowing that kind of gizzards are used for your bait, depending on where you are, you also fry those up. But that none of those kind of like species are managed by the fishery, but also that, there isn't necessarily a quote unquote limit as it relates to how it affects the ecosystem. And so could someone speak to that? Because I don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious about that aspect of the million emails we're getting about this bill.
Mm-hmm.
May I say that Delegate Boyce, that you represent up Baltimore way, and you folks up there have been allowed to haul seine since the beginning of time. And gizzard shad is what we would mainly be targeting, is primarily a bait fish, is what it is classified as. And it is not a species that has been caught very much for any kind of bait. So it hasn't had the look that people hadn't been looking at it as to how many are there or if it is endangered, or but it is not, to my knowledge, by DNR folks. They are not worried about the little bit of gizzard shad that would be caught in the few haul seines that we actually would be using on the bay.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you're saying is that you're saying that there is no effect on the ecosystem if there isn't necessarily a limit to kind of hauling this particular.
Well, I don't think there's any limits anywhere in any other jurisdiction where haul seining is allowed, and I believe, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, Anne Arundel County is the only jurisdiction not allowed to haul seine.
That's correct.
Well, this is a question, as the other delegates are saying, we're getting a whole bunch of emails, so we're just asking questions as it's appropriate. So thanks so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
I've got a question. Delegate Howard, when you began with the, somebody goes, uh-oh. When you began with the bill, you said that this was a local bill. Is this, did I mishear you, or?
No, it's Anne Arundel County bill.
The delegation signed off?
Yes, sir, unanimously, just like last year. So this bill, yes, sir. And I don't want to reiterate. I know everybody's got better things to be doing. We've been listening to me reiterate, but just like last year, this bill is an exact same posture, other than carved out Severn River per their request, being sensitive to their needs. I took advantage of the fact that we didn't get to the bill in the Senate last year due to COVID, carved them out, which I was going to do on the Senate side anyway last year, carved them out. Bill comes with full Anne Arundel County delegation vote and support, unanimous, comes with delegation letter and a letter of support from DNR, just like last year. And we passed it through the delegation, through the committee, and through the House of Delegates, all unanimously last year.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's turn to the opponent to the bill, Larry Jennings. Okay, Larry, tell us why this is a horrible thing.
Oh, I wish I had other news, but we very much are against this bill. These are rivers that are highly valued by recreational anglers, environmentalists. We spent hundreds of people spend hours upon hours trying to restore the habitat and bring back yellow perch in these rivers. Very, very important that we understand. There has been no stock assessment. DNR does not know how many are an acceptable level to remove and still sustain mudshad. We may not eat them, but yellow perch eat them, white perch eat them, striped bass eat them, catfish eat them. They are important to the ecosystem greatly, as probably the predominant forage species for all the fish we like to catch and sometimes eat. These are little kid areas where they're after panfish and the yellow perch, white perch. And as haul seine regulation goes, the only defined bycatch that you will get cited for as a commercial waterman is striped bass. These nets, when they get yellow perch, white perch, all the bluegills, crappie, there's no defined bycatch that they must be removed from the net. They go in the pot, they go into the tractor trailer loads that will be removed by these nets. You're not talking a boatload. You're talking in Baltimore County, a whole weekend to unload 2 or 3 tractor trailer loads of mudshad, carp, everything else, and everything goes into that truck to be shipped down south at 6 or 7 cents a part, 6 or 7 cents a pound. These are very highly volume operations that make money only in high volume. And There is no legal bycatch defined in all things. Thank you.
Okay, I suppose I have to ask the predictable question. Since the proponents said that Anne Arundel County is the place in the state where this prohibition exists, is there A, is that true? And B, is there a compelling reason why that is?
I believe it is true, Chair.
Well,
Certainly
I'm
been
asking
stated.
Larry Jennings.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think it may be true. I'm not really sure. This is a fishery and gear type that really is only coming on lately because there's a southern market that's desperate for any kind of fish. 6 or 7 cents a pound is still ridiculous, but because
okay, but wait a minute. The question was
this area, and I don't know the answer for sure.
Okay, and then the second question,
and I don't know why it would have been carved out originally.
well, can you think? Well, okay, so my second question then is, what would be the compelling reason for not passing the bill? I mean, is there some compelling reason why we should not pass this bill from your point of view?
All of the recreational fishermen that particularly children and families go in, most of them don't go out on the bay and fish for trophy rockfish. Many of them are fishing off their docks in their small boats in these small tributaries. And these nets, as he said, 1,500 feet long in these rivers, they can carve out a huge population of fish in one haul. Because it's 15 feet and you take it in a semicircle, that's a half a mile of river covered by one net.
So typically, I've been looking on the internet and I did this last year and then promptly forgot it, Hall seine fishing, and typically the photographs are of 2 people standing at either end of the net. Is that the way it's typically done, or is there a boat on one side and a person on the other? How does it typically take place?
That's exactly typical of the most common uses for Hall seines. Those are smaller ones used for science, for stock assessments, or checking the young of the year for striped bass. You take a defined length of net and 2 people operate it. This is a totally different sphere. This is where you're looking to catch 30, 40, 50,000 pounds of fish in one day. And that's what they're at.
One of the members of my committee said that it's already illegal, probably Jay Jacobs, that it's already illegal to put boats on either end and use a Hall seine in that fashion. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And would this proposed bill make it legal to have 2 boats?
No, it would not. It would only be the one boat that goes out the full length of the net from the stake near shore and then does a semicircle or as best they can around to trap as many fish as possible.
Okay. Any other questions for Larry Jennings? Okay, seeing none, that ends the public hearing on House Bill 843. Thank you, one and all. We're now at the end of our public hearing. It's only 3 o'clock, but I know some subcommittees have a lot of work to do. So Marvin, what say you?
Housing and real property will meet at 3:15 to give the subcommittee members an opportunity to read all of the amendments on HB 861, which is the only bill we will take up this evening. 861 with the amendments. 3:15, please.
How long do you think you'll be, Marvin?
I'm going to guess at the largest extent of things, it should not take 30 minutes at all, but please give us 30 minutes.
Okay, so in that case, why don't I have my leadership team meet at 4 o'clock? We'll meet at 4. Any other subcommittee chairs have any announcements? Any other normal humans have any announcements? As opposed to abnormal people like me. Okay, great. In that case, you're all free to go. Have a nice evening.
Carry on.